Thank you. As mentioned, my name is Jaime Lopez Jr. You can find me on Twitter as @DevRel. So if you have questions that we don't get to during the session, please connect with me on there, ask questions there, I'm happy to help you. Also on GitHub as DevRel, so keeping things as one consistent name across the social media, which I learned that. So I'm glad I was doing that, didn't even know it. And if you're looking for the slides and you want to just peek ahead, you can go to GitHub, check my profile. My slides are already up there, exactly what I will cover. So if you're interested in that, do whatever you want. Take notes, print it out, burn it, whatever it is you want to do. It's up to you. So in today's agenda, we're going to talk about really sort of three main things, like why do we even need to explain the value of DevRel? What is a written narrative, as I'm describing it here? And finish off with some concrete examples that hopefully will be useful to you. Maybe not to use as is, but to give you inspiration as to the kinds of things that you can do to explain the value of DevRel. So starting right off with the big question, why do we even need to explain the value of DevRel? There are DevRel conferences. There are so many of us out here who clearly are gainfully employed as DevRel folks, and it feels like every company has a DevRel team, right? DevRel sort of won the battle. Like, we don't really have to prove that we should even exist as an industry, right? So why am I up here? Why am I trying to help you explain the value of DevRel? I know there's like a few things about DevRel, and I sort of lead into this with the question of, well, what is DevRel? And not from a definition or like a mechanical standpoint. I mean, what qualities does DevRel have? Well, we know that DevRel is not well understood. It's a evolving and growing practice, and that's why we come to conferences like DevRelCon Yokohama to make sure that we're understanding the latest techniques, sharing and learning from each other. We also know that DevRel is very complex. There's been so many discussions we've had out here during the conference round. What sort of team members would you have? Probably have technical writers and community builders, and developer experience engineers, and developer advocates, and developer evangelists, which are different than developer advocates, right? Like, it's a very complex sort of topic to cover. And that's just for people like us who are in it and we live it, we breathe it, we work with it every day. Will somebody in a different department at your company, in marketing, or strategy, or finance, accounting, product design, engineering, will those teams necessarily know it? Probably not, because I also don't know much about accounting or finance. So when they talk about their topics, I won't understand it because it's not well understood to begin with, and it's a very complicated topic, even if you believe that you understand it. We also know that DevRel is difficult to measure. There's been so many great talks that have talked on this topic. Kim Maida had a really brilliant talk the other day about ways that you can measure. Whatever you're going to do, we do know that it is difficult to measure. It's not like a manufacturing process of input comes in, process it, and then it's out. And you can really effectively measure how many widgets did we make today, did we make more widgets than we made yesterday. DevRel doesn't really have those real obvious things around. How do we measure, are you effective at doing DevRel? Am I effective? Are you effective? Are we effective? So I think we often fall back on, well, let's get some metrics. Let's get some more metrics. And let's get some even more metrics out of somewhere. And I'm not here to tell you not to do that. I think metrics are great. I think measurements is great. Once again, Kim Maida's talking about measurements. If your company is positioned in a position where it can say, you know what, we know from that full life cycle that a sign up over here is absolutely worth this quantity of dollars over here.
I mean, there's refreshments in the back, so go, you don't need my talk, you're done. Like, it's not an easy thing to do, but if you're set up for that, great. But you're probably stuck a little bit more like me, where I don't have that obvious sign-up thing. I have a industry and a developer relations topic where if I had 1 million signups in 1 year, I may not have done a good job because they may not have been meaningful signups. Alternatively, if I had 1 signup in any given year, if it's the right one with a strategically important company, I might get promoted, I might get a bonus. So it's really hard to say, like, how can I prove the value of the DevRel? I have to use non-traditional kind of things for what we might normally check. So I'm always looking at, with whatever metrics that we're looking at, any facts and data that we pull in, do those matter? And I don't mean do they matter to us, because clearly the DevRel team can track a lot of things that are meaningful to us, like, are we getting appropriate feedback with our work? Are we getting engagement? Are we helping developers have a better experience? I kind of want to think about it from like the budget standpoint, because I would be shocked if I asked for a round of hands of who has too much budget available to them. Like, I guess I'll ask you, raise your hands if your DevRel budget is larger than you think it should be. But you're absolutely willing to donate some budget to some other department. Yeah, I didn't think so, right? There's never enough budget, and the budget is always one of those things that DevRel is going to have to work with, even if it's not a direct thing. I know many of you all report into like the marketing department, so it's probably front and center. But even if you're like my team, we historically reported into engineering, and now we report into the office of the chief technology officer. So we don't have as direct a tie to budget as some other teams do, but it's still there, right? It's still there in the form of like the company ultimately has a finite quantity of money that it spends money here, it cannot spend money there. So budget always really comes down to everything you're going to do, even if you're not chasing dollars, even if you're not chasing metrics. So if you're looking to grow a team or maintain an existing team, you're going to have to think about that, right? So I started my role at my company as the first and only developer advocate, hung around long enough and did a good enough job to not get fired, and somehow they decided, well, you should be the manager of the team, and we will grow a team. I have a small team of 3 of us, and a big way I was able to get to that place was to explain the value of DevRel, knowing that I didn't have dashboards or metrics going up and to the right and dollars flowing from the heavens. And in this difficult economy where there's been a lot of layoffs in the tech industry, maintaining that existing team so we don't lose people, writing narratives and doing them effectively has also been another way to make sure that we can explain the value of what DevRel does for the company. So the second part of this talk, the actual written narratives. What these are is kind of what it sounds like from the English words. You're going to have a short executive summary, so keep that kind of in mind. And it'll have some qualities to it. First thing is it needs to tell a story. And I don't mean something like Star Wars, and I don't mean something like Evangelion. It's not that kind of story. It's not meant to be an entertaining story or a gripping story necessarily. It's meant to be more like the way that humans help explain things, right? When we have people coming in as new human beings into the world, they don't know anything at all about how things work. So we often tell children stories of like, here, a person who does not have context because you're brand new to the world, here is why we do these things for the holidays. Here is why this part of our culture exists. So use that same concept to tell a little story that explains what DevRel is doing and what it has done, say on like a weekly basis or monthly basis, whatever makes sense for you. Because somebody who's sitting in accounting and finance, or somebody who's sitting in a marketing department, may not understand what it is your team does. So you got to give them enough context to tell a little bit of a story. But it can't be just a status report of, we did this thing. Why did we do it? What was the impact? Right? Why does it matter that I'm telling you that we did this thing? So make sure you always explain the impact and there's an actual point in your story. And it can't just be your words, like, take my word for it. Trust me, I'm a really good, truthful human being. We actually achieved this impact. Your metrics are valuable. Here's the actual facts and data that can prove to you that we did have this impact, right? That I'm not just saying things, there's actual measurements somewhere, and we say, look, we're actually having this impact. And as I mentioned, these are like executive summaries. Probably oftentimes you'll send them to your executive teams, and you want to be concise and keep things short and to the point. I think a common theme at this conference has been attention is a valuable asset, and executives often don't have the time or the energy to read a long blog post or to watch your 6-hour video explaining what DevRel did this week, right? So be concise, but also, based on my own personal experience, there are some topics or even some executives that will absolutely digest every summary and say, that's not enough. I want to dive in for more. I want more details. And you can have that. You can have your supporting documents, your supporting details, links to your metrics, your dashboards, whatever they are. You can put those details in iTunes. We have the technology, and it did not cost $6 million. Right? So the final thing here is some concrete examples. So these are examples that are sort of near and dear to my heart. This is what my team does a lot of. They're not meant to be just copy and paste them down and throw them into your weekly summary. It's not that quite kind of thing. They're meant to be more illustrative of real world things to give you ideas and concepts, and use those as inspiration for what you and your team do. So, of the first two examples, I like leading off with the technical docs one, because technical documentation, doing things out in the open public web, is pretty key to getting really good quality developer experience, convincing people to use your product, to continue using your product. And you might be able to say something in a few short sentences that help explain the impact of, like, what was it that your team did this entire week? A real example could be, we made the getting started page easier to understand. Pretty simple. I think anybody random at your company might understand it. Okay, you took this thing, you made it easier to understand. If they don't know what you're talking about, which page you're talking about, or what a getting started page is, I've got a link on here. You link off to say, here's the supporting documentation, here's the getting started page, here's what it was before, here's what it is now. And if somebody really wanted that detail or needed that detail, you can go into it. With one more sentence, we could help explain, a little bit more of the why we did this and the impact. Like, examples now focus on connecting to our API. So maybe we'd come up with a really cool idea of, like, getting started, but it turns out, you know what? There was just too much cruft up at the beginning of, like, actually, they don't need to set up this entire project. They don't need to use this particular tool set. If we just take it way back to basics of run this thing from the command line, use this code space, download this sample project, whatever it is, just really taking it back down to the roots can make a getting started page easier. So it's not like, well, here you go. If you just install Mac OS or get the latest copy of Windows 11, like, that might be a little much to get started with, right? And then your metrics can come in and really nail it on that impact of, like, the updated page has increased signups by 22%, and we've reduced support tickets by 17%. So now with your metrics there, you say, look, we've tracked something and it had an impact. We spent the week making our getting started page more easier to understand. We saw signups go up. We saw support costs go down. It sounds like a really good win. I think even the most well out there department head would be like, yeah, cool. Good job, DevRel. I kind of understand what you're doing, and I understand you're doing it well. Another thing you might do is probably monthly meetups. It seems like that's been kind of a pretty common thing. Whatever regularity you have meetups, you're getting the word out there, you're helping developers in sessions. So maybe you might have a situation where you've partnered with the marketing team and say, you know what, we really want to make this a bigger thing. So we're going to take marketing budget, we're going to spend it on social media ad campaigns, let people know and have awareness that we've got something. So we could put something in a sentence that says, we grew attendance at the monthly meetup with a social media campaign. And once again, you could link off to maybe the registration page, or somebody could see it for themselves, or maybe you're linking to documentation that says, well, this is what we did, we're going to create Instagram, TikTok, WeChat, Twitch, whatever sort of media it was, so somebody who really wanted to get into details could, but he could see where was the money going, what exactly was this being spent on. And you can have details like, look, this month's meetup had 100 actual attendees out of 200 registrations. We have some metrics there. And say there were 50 more attendees than last month, so some significant growth. And there were 75 more registrations than last month. So we actually saw both go up. And in those few short sentences, you've hopefully helped somebody understand, why did marketing and DevRel spend this money? Oh, I see, you actually saw some value out of it and you had some impact. It might be something we experiment with again in the future. But again, with that short, concise narrative, probably pretty much every executive out there can get a little bit of something to sort of sink their teeth into, or sort of hang their hat on, of like, oh, I understand what this is doing, and it's not this weird thing that DevRel and marketing decided to spend money on. So in summary, if you take nothing else out of this, how are you going to write your narratives to do a better job of explaining the value of DevRel? You're going to tell a story so that people understand the context and the background of how this works. You're going to explain the impact, so it's not just what you did, it's why you did it and why it matters. You'll use facts and data to prove that what you said is actually true in some verifiable, quantifiable way. You'll be concise. Somebody wants to spend 20 minutes reading your blog post. And for those executives who do care about one particular topic, or actually do care about every little detail because they're very hands-on, put your details in the hyperlinks. As I said at the beginning, I'm Jaime Lopez Jr. If you have questions we don't get through, ping me on Twitter, @DevRel, also at GitHub, DevRel. You can find copies of the slides, eventually copies of the video, etc. will be there. Thank you all for attending, and thank you for DevRel Yokohama 2023 for inviting me.